The past is attacking us. Hello, my name is Will, and this is Exploding Helicopter, the podcast that never travels in time without a grey sports almanac. Now, as the world's leading expert on helicopter explosions in film, I'm often asked what is the earliest exploding helicopter? And there's a number of ways of answering that question. The earliest film to show an exploding helicopter was The Giant Behemoth, which came out in 1959. The film that shows the earliest exploding helicopter, if you think about it in terms of runtime, is The Delta Force, which, barely 7 seconds after the film's begun, shows us a huge chopper fireball. But if you were to consider that question in an even more convoluted way, in terms of the chronology shown within the film, then the film we're reviewing here, Samurai Commando Mission 1549, could well feature the earliest exploding helicopter. That's because the chopper conflagration we see here takes place during the 16th century. To help me review the film, I'm joined by a man who's so far behind the times he's practically a time traveller. It's Nick Rehak. Welcome back to the show, Nick.
Thank you very much for having me, Will.
Oh, no, it's always a pleasure to have you back here. And you're back here, and we are going back in time to review this particular film. And, given the subject and the premise of this particular movie, it kind of made me wonder, what are some of your favourite, or what is your favourite time travel film?
I mean, everybody loves Groundhog Day. Everybody loves Back to the Future. I got a real soft spot for Looper.
Okay.
I don't even like Bruce Willis, but there's something about this movie and just the concept that I think is so cool, and I think Rian Johnson does a really good job with it, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I feel like it's different, too. You have some of those, like someone goes back in time to assassinate somebody else kind of things, but the way they use this is kind of like a hitman kind of thing. I don't know. I just think the whole concept is interesting.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. I think it blends a couple of different genres there, as you say, the sort of hitman genre together with time travel. I think there's also quite a strong emotional element to that. Obviously, you've got the thriller side of the things, but there's some emotional character depth as well to that film, and I think it's it's a really satisfying movie on a whole variety of different levels.
And what's really nice, too, is it's not like it's in L.A. or New York or Chicago. Like, it's supposed to be – I feel like it's supposed to take place in, Kansas City or some, kind of a more lesser-known city. And even the setting, it's like a much smaller city. It's out in the country. It's not what we would typically expect, like a big time travel film to be.
And when you watch these types of movies, how critically are you watching them? Because there are some real aficionados of time travel movies out there who will nitpick over perhaps the science or the paradoxes that are taking place within these movies. Myself, as long as it's reasonably believable, that kind of stuff just generally washes over me. I don't find it bothers me. But for other people, they're unless the science is absolutely perfect, they seem to get overly frustrated by these types of films. So where are you on that spectrum?
I'm in the camp with you. I think if it's reasonable and everybody's having fun, let's go for it. Films that address it and try to explain it, I'm like, oh, okay, you want it to make sense because you're taking yourself very super serious, you're building that element into it. Perfect example in Looper, when they bring it up, Jeff Daniels' character is like, all this stuff is so, crazy, it fries your brain like an egg, don't even worry about it. He's kind of just oh, the time travel part's not important. He's over here is what's important. And I think that's fun. But then you also have films like Back to the Future that do a really good job with continuity and the little changes and adjustments here and there. They really think through all of what they're doing, which is really fun for the moviegoer, because you're like, oh yeah, or why is it? Oh yeah, because of that thing. It's just fun to see. But yeah, so long as it's reasonable, I'm okay. I'm not gonna get butthurt about it.
Okay, I think it's time we got stuck into the film itself, but before that, let's listen to a gruff-voiced man speak in Japanese.
460年の時を超え、西暦1549年の戦国時代に自衛隊がタイムスリップした。彼らは飛ばされた。敵は織田信長。 俺はこの時代からやり直し、この国を一から作り直す。どうしてだ、的場さん。歴史への極端な回。
The Japanese military are trying to create a shield that will protect their equipment from electromagnetic pulse weapons. During a test of the new device, something goes wrong and a group of soldiers and their equipment mysteriously disappear. They're transported back in time to feudal Japan. They land in the midst of a battlefield where they're promptly attacked by samurai soldiers. In the present day, we fast forward 2 years. Black holes that suck in matter start appearing across Japan. With changes in the past threatening the future, the military decide to send another team of soldiers back through time to try and correct history. This film is directed by Masaaki Tezuka, who mostly has worked as a second unit director, but has helmed a few films, including Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 3. As for the cast, I'm afraid they weren't names that jumped out at me particularly, but we should put that down to my familiarity or lack of it with Japanese cinema rather than anything else. It's worth pointing out that this film is a remake of a 1979 film starring Sonny Chiba, which has a number of titles, including Time Slip and G.I. Samurai. This particular movie, Samurai Commando Mission 1549, has a user rating of exactly 5 on IMDb. So with all of that out of the way, Nick, what did you make of this film?
I thought it was kind of fun. I didn't expect to enjoy it as much as I did. I thought it was going to be like a weird, like ironically enjoying this kind of thing, but I genuinely had fun with it. There's a couple things that I wish they would have done differently or they could have approached differently. And at times it does feel overly predictable, but it's still just, I don't know, it's just kind of fun. Like I enjoyed watching it like thoroughly, more thoroughly than I thought I would.
Well, I think you're a lot warmer on this movie than I am, because I found this quite a deeply frustrating movie. I think it's got a great concept. I love the idea of military forces from today going back in time, using their superior technology to take over the particular time period that they find themselves in, and then obviously that then having kind of present day consequences for us, and so another team got to go back through time and try and thwart these nefarious plans that are taking place. But I just found that whilst the concept was really cool, I was really frustrated by the execution. And the reason why I found it so frustrating, one of the reasons I found it so frustrating was because there are lots of like ideas and sort of subplots within this film that don't seem to go anywhere. So there's this samurai soldier Shichibei who's brought forward in time as part of the first experiment, then goes back with the rescue mission. There's a whole plot line involving him being romantically linked to this feudal lord's daughter, who's then been married off to Matoba. There's this idea of Colonel Matoba, who's this kind of evil soldier who's now sort of who's messing up the present by interfering with the past. You know, Matoba and Kashimi, who's in the rescue team. There's this idea of them being rivals and opponents, but there's no backstory to that. And you know, the reason why I feel like there are these subplots, the reason that there are these subplots that go nowhere is because in part of my research for this film, I discovered that the version that we both watched, Nick, was 30 minutes shorter than the Japanese version of this film. And so there are lots of things within this film that I just felt like didn't really work for me, and I think that's largely explained by the fact that there's 30 minutes missing of this film. And I mean, I don't know what you thought. I thought the beginning of this film was very strange. I mean, we just dumped straight into the action. There's no sense of build up or tension or anticipation, and I suspect that's because many minutes have been hacked out of perhaps that part of the film. And I don't know, you know, as I say, I dropped that little nugget of detail on you just before we came on air. Now you are aware of this missing 30 minutes of footage. Do you kind of see the film in a slightly different light?
I do, because like you said, there's a couple subplots that don't really go anywhere, especially, you know, with the feudal lord's daughter and the guy going forward and back in time. I thought that was just kind of one of those, just a one-off character who comes in for an exposition line or two or says, oh, this plan, that plan, and then kind of backs away. So I'm like, okay, yeah, whatever, that's fine. But I kind of like films now that just kind of drop you into something and they're just like, you figure it out, or you'll figure it out along the way. So knowing that there's probably some stuff missing from the beginning and then obviously throughout the film, but then it becomes where throughout the film do you think this information is? Or has this film been edited in such a way to where you wouldn't think that there's all this other, you know what I mean? It's not like they say, okay, we're just going to snip here and here, put it back together, or do they have to like snip and then do kind of like completely different edits altogether? That's what interests me now. But you saying that definitely makes me wonder what they cut out and why. Like, why wouldn't they just leave it in there? There's nothing wrong. I mean, the version I watched is about an hour and a half. So even if it's another half hour, 2 hours, that's not bad. It's not like it's some 4-hour ROM and they're cutting it down to 3 or 2.5. That's a little bit different. This, it's like, I enjoy the world that they've built. I'm interested in these characters to an extent. Let me see more and get more of a kind of oomph out of it.
Well, I from what I understand, they have basically cut out a lot of the sort of like the dialogue scenes, the exposition scenes, scenes which develop the characters to essentially then leave in more of the action and make it more of an action centric film. But yeah, you make a great point there. It's not like 2 hours is a particularly long film anyway. I mean, if it was if this was clocking in at 3 hours 20, well then yeah, you know what? I think you can kind of understand why they might have why some sort of European or American distributor might have wanted to take the scissors to it, because they think, no one's going to watch 3 hours and 20 minutes of subtitled exposition or whatever. But I do think it really hurts the film because why is Kashimi, who goes back with this rescue team, he's a former soldier who is now running a restaurant, but we never find out why he's running that restaurant. Why has he left the military? Why is he now sort of like opting out of serving his country? And the only explanation that we get that he has to be called back into service is this one line of dialogue, is that he sort of is the only person to ever have defeated like Motoba's defense program, whatever that is, never explained. That's the only, you kind of expect that in the longer version of the film, that dynamic of the film would have been a bit more fleshed out, so that when these two characters finally lock horns, there's some there's more stakes on it than what we kind of get in this particular movie.
And it's funny that you bring that up. I remember seeing that line and immediately my brain created this entire backstory and filled in the blank for it. It's I can't think of the name of it. What's the test in Star Trek?
Kobayashi Maru. I thought exactly the same thing.
So I'm thinking he beats this test and he wasn't supposed to, and he gets just like a bunch of guff from people, and they're like, oh, you must have cheated, you must have done all this other stuff, and he's like, you know what, fine, I'm gonna leave, and he's just gone. In my mind, that's exactly what happened. But yeah, you're right. They don't talk about it. They don't explain it. And then even I like how they're like, yeah, somebody got sick from eating your food, and the guy working there's like, wait, am I gonna get sick? And he tells him, I'll go home. I'll figure this out. Like, what is that guy getting home and tell his folks, hey, you're home from work early? Yeah, because some health inspectors showed up.
I don't know if I need to go back in tomorrow because we may be permanently closed down. Who knows?
Yeah.
But, I mean, what did you think? I mean, we've sort of pulled on some of the loose threads, I think, that are exposed by the cut or the edit of the film that we've seen. But what did you think of, I guess, because, what did you think? I guess this film's big selling point is the clash between 21st century hardware versus 16th century samurai. How well do you think, that for me that's the kind of the mouth-watering part of the kind of concept of this film. How well do you think this film executed on that particular idea?
I think they handled it as well as they could have and kept it realistic. Because you could have gotten to some where they're shooting bullets and somebody's with a sword is like cutting them in half or doing some crazy unnecessarily physics-defying flips and jumps and all this other nonsense that have kind of become these bigger, like futuristic or just blockbuster type films that feature, samurai artistry and sword play and gunplay and everything. So to keep it as realistic as they did, I think it works. I think it would have been cool to see some kind of like hybrids, like maybe there's a samurai blade and in the handle of the blade is a little thing they can kind of twist and, like a gunpowder shot comes out or something to distract the enemy so you can kind of dip away. Something like that. Little tweaks here and there, kind of like like a steampunk for samurai punk. I don't know. But just like little things here and there. So I think they do a well enough job.
I mean, for myself, I found myself a bit frustrated by the execution of that particular idea. And I think what I found a little bit frustrating was because the 21st century soldiers, their weaponry is just so superior. So there is scenes where you just see these samurai soldiers just being like hosed with machine gun fire, and they've got absolutely no way of like reasonably fighting back. At the beginning of the film, there's a sequence that definitely does it better, where the soldiers are ambushed by some samurai, so the element of surprise kind of evens out the firepower equation, and that sequence worked for me a bit better. But I kind of wish that this film had perhaps thought through that idea a little bit more, and perhaps that the kind of the modern day soldiers perhaps they hose down these samurai, but then because they've got no way of resupplying, they then running low on ammunition. So like later on in the film, they're trying to nurse their ammunition, which then would perhaps like even up the scales between the two forces a bit more.
I agree with you. I think that's because in my head, because I'm just so like into the world. In my head, I'm like, oh, okay, they're having to do this because of ammunition rations, or when you're shooting, all of a sudden it's close combat. You can't take an extra step back or two to fire your gun. Like you need to attack immediately, and if they're swinging a sword, you got to be ducking and rolling, and all of a sudden it becomes instead of close combat now it's melee, or I guess close combat now becomes this melee combat. And these soldiers, they don't know melee combat. They just know guns and shooting and maybe, a couple disarming moves, put you in a headlock or, kind of kick your legs out from under you or whatever. But they don't know how to handle swords. These guys know how to handle swords. They have the stamina and the strength to handle that kind of thing. And, these guys just don't. So I don't know. I think I like what you. I do agree with you though. The beginning, how they kind of have that like stealth and ambush and everything. I thought that was really, really cool and well done because it's kind of scary in a way. It's like, oh, they're not prepared at all. Like you don't know, they don't know what's coming. They're not ready for anything. And then they do get a little bit better with their tanks, but
yeah. Now this is a time travel film, and as we were talking about at the top of the show, those kind of time travel films sort of come in a variety of different flavors. Those that really focus on sort of getting the science of it right, and others which just want to, hey, we can travel through time, don't think about the mechanics of it too much. But I wanted to just check in with you as to how well you thought this film was trying to do something that was realistic, because there are some interesting nods, I thought, in this film towards trying to be consistent with the kind of science of time travel. So like one example of that is the fact that the soldiers who go back on this rescue mission have these sort of special sort of like organic bullets, so they won't leave any, the idea being that they won't leave any trace because they don't want to like mess with the past and influence the future. Another example of that is that Colonel Motoba, who is this soldier who's gone back to the past and decided, you know what, I'm now gonna change the future of Japan. He takes over the identity of like one of the feudal lords of the day, and I get the idea being that because he's then impersonating that character, he is not sort of interfering too much with the timeline. So he can influence the timeline how he wants, but he's not completely sort of messing up. He's kind of getting in below the radar. So there are these little nods within the film to trying to sort of, I guess, make the science of time travel sort of, stand up to, give it a bit of scientific rigor. I mean, how well do you think the film did from that particular perspective?
So for me, it's a bit of a mixed bag. There are some things I think they did well, like the idea of, hey, we have to come back to this exact same spot. You have so much time left. I like that they don't really dig into like the science behind it. It's more of like hey, we have this thing developed already. We tested it once. We got to do it again. Obviously, we know how to do it. We bring, so-and-so back and forth. So I like that part. I like that it's just, hey, we know how to do it and we have some base rules. My thing is, and this is just getting kind of into like very granular detail, when they give them the bullets, right, to where they don't leave a trace and they don't, impact history and anything, aren't they still leaving the casings behind? Immediately, that's the only thing I thought about. And then for the next 20 minutes or so in my head, I'm like, yeah, but the casings, like, are they going to have somebody coming behind picking them up? Like, you're introducing this whole new idea, and so that kind of stuck with me and bothered me a little bit. I do like the idea, like you said, of him coming through and becoming this person, this not character, but this person in history and having like little influence here and there. I think that's very smart, because then it's you would really never know. He just kind of slipped in there and he's doing it.
Well, apart from the fact that he's built a massive great oil refinery to allow him to refuel the vehicles that the 21st century vehicles that he's still got in his possession and is using. So,
well, that was my next thing. So what I don't like is that how it's 2 years, right? You're telling me you've built this machinery, this technology in 2 years to where it's stable, to where it's producing what you needed to produce. A bunch of military guys and soldiers are going in there, right? Let's just say it's 40 tops. Do they have degrees in science and chemical structures and engineering? Do they have the science people behind them to be able to create that? Sure, there's labor there, and they can build and put the machines and everything together, but that's some big machinery. And then you have steam and all. There's just so many different facets and stuff that I'm like, there's no way in hell that they built this in 2 years. So that's, I mean, of all the things, that and the shell casings really bugged me. And I think that's what took a lot of my enjoyment out. I think had those two been a little more sound, I would have enjoyed it more. But it's every time I saw it, all I could do was just start thinking about it again. And then, like, obviously they're not going with any OSHA or safety regulations, so that's not a – but how would it look so, like, clean and industrial like that? Why wouldn't it have been influenced by the style of the day?
Well, yeah, I think I could have bought the idea, because the oil refinery looks very much like something that had been built in the 20th or the 21st century. Whereas if the oil refinery looked much more crude, I could have bought into it a little bit more. Yeah. But it's this huge, great thing. It's clearly towering into the sky. It's a bit, as you say, like, not only do you have to question whether these soldiers would have had the scientific expertise or the engineering expertise to put something like this together, but they're going back to the 16th century. How are they manufacturing the materials in order to build something like that? So I think a slightly different. Obviously, looking at it, it looks like an oil refinery, but I wish, like you said, I wish they'd built something that perhaps looked something a bit more like it might have been produced in the time, a bit more sort of consistent with the era in which this film is being set and taking place.
Yeah, like something inconspicuous, like it's kind of crudely built into something where you don't even notice it, and maybe when they're like held captive, they stumble upon it and they're like, "Wait a second, they're still doing this, which makes that, which there's no way. And then they find that he's still got the weaponry or something like that would have been like, oh man, look at this guy. And that could have made sense because over the course of 2 years, they can kind of do that. But to have all that, it's like, come on, what are you doing?
So would you recommend this film to somebody else?
I would. If someone said, hey, I'm looking for something a little goofy, a little different, I'm like, look, it's an hour and a half maybe. It's going to be time travel, military, samurai, maybe a love story in there, revenge tales, some twists and turns. I think it's fun. I think it's definitely worth. And if it's somebody by themselves, maybe not. Maybe have a buddy or two with you. But I would recommend this to somebody. So long as I knew what they did and didn't like. I'm not just going to say, hey, Mom, check this out. It's more of like I know what you're into, so I think you would like this kind of thing.
So a recommendation, but with caveats. So
yes.
I think that's fair enough. So I think we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be looking at the exploding helicopter action.
A desperate situation turns deadly when a stranded woman takes a ride from a psychotic stranger.
Like we played Tarzan, Eugene?
I'm in the car! That plunges her headlong.
The man outside is a killer and he's after me.
Into a time game of survival.
I was here before and you sent me back in time. Yeah, just like Tarzan and Jane, right, Frank? You are reading my mind, girl.
Remember that little experiment that I was working on? Got it to work.
Beat me on up! James Belushi, Kylie Davis.
That machine has got to be destroyed.
And Frank Whaley.
Don't go back to the beginning, it'll never end.
Star in the sci-fi time travel thriller, Retroactive.
We're back, and now we're looking at the exploding helicopter action. We have two examples to enjoy in this film. The first happens early doors after the rescue team travel back to 1549. They use a Kawasaki XOH-1 to scout out the area. They spot the rogue colonel's castle base, and the helicopter flies in for a closer look. Unfortunately, the vintage castle's defences have been given a 21st century upgrade in the shape of surface-to-air missiles. The chopper evades the first missile but is hit by the second and explodes. The second chopper fireball occurs late in the film. Colonel Matoba still has one of his AH-1 Cobra helicopters remaining. With his castle under siege, Matoba deploys his chopper, but Kashimi's team are well prepared and use their own rocket launcher to shoot the chopper down as it approaches. The helicopter lurches around out of control and collides with an oil refinery that we've just been talking about, triggering a cascade of explosions. So Nick, what did you make of the exploding helicopter action?
I liked the first one a lot. And I kind of thought, I'm like, oh, that's the only one we're getting. I really like the first one because it's traditional. It's a real classic. We missed the first shot. We get him on the second one. It's smooth. It's clean. It's an aggressive blast, and then it's over, right? And it felt really good to see that because we've seen some pretty wild explosions throughout the show and series, and I've loved it. Absolutely have loved it. But sometimes you just want
meat and potatoes.
You just want a classic. You know what I mean? Exactly. Like, look, I want a classic. But that second one, I also really enjoy that second one because you're not expecting it to all of a sudden here comes that missile turning and then it hits and just massive explosion after massive explosion. Like it really cascades and it gets bad really quick. So to see such a level of destruction off of an exploding helicopter like that, you love to see it, So we get something fun and then we get amped up, like you said, you get your steak and potatoes, but then you get an ice cream sundae with like the sparklers in it and like a cascade of like a sprinkle volcano. You know what I mean?
Well, I don't think I can top that culinary metaphor that you have used there to describe the exploding helicopter action. But I thought instead I would regale you with a few brief tidbits about exploding helicopters in time travel movies, because this is not the only exploding helicopter in a movie involving time travel. So I don't know if you've ever seen the 1980 movie called The Final Countdown, Nick, where a kind of airplane carrier is sent back in time to the hours before Pearl Harbor, and the captain has to decide whether he's going to use his kind of modern day ship in order to try and prevent the attack by Japanese fighters on Pearl Harbor. I don't know if you've ever seen that film, Nick.
I've never heard of that, but I really want to see it now.
There's also another time travel film called Biggles, Adventures Through Time, where we get to see a helicopter blown up during World War One. There's also a time travel movie called The Philadelphia Experiment, where soldiers from 1943 get sent forward into the future, and there's an exploding helicopter in there. And obviously, as we mentioned here, that Samurai Commando is a remake of G.I. Samurai, the 1979 film, and in that original version of the film, there is an exploding helicopter in there. So there's a kind of a small and interesting subgenre of time travel movies with exploding helicopters.
I'm for it, and I hope it continues. We haven't had a good time travel movie in a while. You have Tenet, but it's like that's a twist on time travel. Like that's not like your standard time travel. But now I feel like I got to watch G.I. Samurai now because I don't know.
Yeah, I want to. Well, I need to watch that film because it does have an exploding helicopter in it. It is.
Oh yeah.
It is a bit tricky to track down. I have already done some work to sort of to look into its availability, but we are obliged to watch it and obliged to review it, Nick. So we'll have to keep working on tracking this movie down.
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, it will be better than my viewing experience of this film. I found it on YouTube, and it was like watching a VHS copy through rice paper. It was not great. Well, rice paper seems very offensive, so I'll say tissue paper. Very thin. Thin paper.
I don't think that's necessarily down to YouTube or whoever uploaded it. The version of the film that this edited version that was sort of released in Europe, the DVD release of it did come in for some criticism of the quality of the transfer. So
really?
Yes, it does seem to be a slightly sort of sloppily put together release on lots of different fronts. But I think that just about wraps things up for this show. Nick, thank you for joining me once again. Do you want to take a moment to plug some of your stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. Rehak Radio over on Mixcloud.com. For all you Lambcast fans, Jay Cluett recently hosted an episode of Lamberty. I sent him so many questions that the entire first round is all the questions I sent him. That's pretty fun. And recently went over to Movies, Films, and Flicks with Mark Hoffmeyer, and we talked about Annihilation and where we could put a jet ski in that movie.
Always with the jet skis, but
always.
As always, don't forget to rate, review, or retweet this podcast. It'd really help us out. Likewise, make sure you check out the Exploding Helicopter website for more reviews and information about films where helicopters explode. We'll be back soon, but until then, keep watching the skies for those exploding helicopters.
This podcast is a proud member of the Lamb Podcasting Network. Find the network at largeassmovieblogs.com.